Um, Good evening, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual lecture series entitled Discover Ukraine, History, Culture, and its People. This event has been organized by the Basis Study Group for Minority History. We would like to thank our partners, URIS, Ukrainian Research for Switzerland Initiative, Universidad Internacional de Cuernavaca, Oriente Medio News, Bnei Brit Chile, and Círculo Israelita de Santiago for bringing this course to Latin America. We would like to remind you that this is a fundraising event for Razom for Ukraine emergency response, and I will send a link to the chat in a minute. My name is Olena Palko, and I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at Birkbeck College in London and a co-convener of the Study Group for Minority History. Please send your questions to me directly or keep them until the end of the lecture. It is my great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Liubov Lankina. Liubov, originally from Kyiv, received her master's in teaching of foreign languages at Universidad Internacional de Cuernavaca in Mexico, where she is currently a professor in the literature department. Her research interests include comparison of mythologies of Ukraine and Mexico and literary analysis. Her presentation today is entitled Origins of Slavic Mythology, Historical Tradition and Contemporary Reality. Thank you, Liubov, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Good afternoon, good night for some of you. I definitely would like to thank so much Olena Palko, the organizer, right, of all the event, of all the conferences Syria, and Manuel Ferris. Thank you so much for the invitation. So definitely I would like to start today's event. All right, and definitely we are going to start with our topic. I'm going to share the screen for you. Yes, I hope you can already see it, right? Wonderful. So today's topic, our topic is going to be Origins of Slavic Mythology, Historical Tradition and Contemporary Reality. It's very curious how usually we associate mythology as something ancient, something just from some historical and previous times of human development. At the same time, it also can represent contemporary reality, and it's also curious how mythology is present in nowadays culture. So today, this is going to be our task to analyze the impact and the bond that exists between Ukrainian people and Slavic mythology, so between history and nowadays, right? Let's start with the table of contents, right? So for today, our plan is to observe the origin of Slavic countries, right? There are several theories about the origin of Slavic countries, and we are going to name, so which countries are Slavic, right? Definitely we will consider also the concepts of Slavic mythology, main Slav or Slavic deities, yeah, and we also will try to analyze the pantheon of Slavic deities, what gods existed and were worshipped by the Slavs. Definitely, the history of Slavic deities affects also holidays in Ukraine, right? So in Ukraine also we still have some celebrations that have this excellent bond between the history, right? The pagan times and Christianity and nowadays, yeah? So we will try to observe which holidays exactly are representing Slavic paganism and Christianity, both of them. Myth in popular culture, yeah, so nowadays mythology is extremely popular, right? Slavic mythologies also have been an object of interest for a lot of TV series, fashion, pop culture, board games, so we will try to observe this point also a little bit. And the conclusion to the topic, right? And definitely we will come to the question part at this point, in this part. I would like to start with a small quote, with a small epigraph by Stanley Kunitz, right? A poet, Stanley Kunitz. Here we have the quote, "Old myth, all gods, old heroes have never died. They are only sleeping at the bottom of our mind, waiting for our call. We have need for them, they represent the wisdom of our race, yeah? So usually we think, we have a prejudice that mythology is something not contemporary, something that already have been forgotten by many of us. At the same time, the old tradition of myth, old heroes, old gods, they are still alive and they are still with us, and they even impact somehow our nowadays culture, right? So they are the basis of each other's origin. So let's start with the history part, right? So Slavic countries. On this slide, you can see Slavic tribes and their presence, right? Since, for example, at this map, we can observe specific tribes present since 7th till 9th century, right? And here you can see that there are 3 divisions, right? So basically, till nowadays, we have West Slavic, East Slavic, and South Slavic groups. These were originally the tribes. You can see that before the countries, the contemporary Slavic countries were divided like nowadays. We have a lot of different tribes, even on territory of Ukraine. If we observe, we have different, we have a quantity of different tribes before Ukraine became an independent nation. So Slavic culture, what can we call a Slavic culture, right? Or Slavic mythology tradition? Slavic culture represents the most numerous ethnic and linguistic body of peoples in Europe, residing chiefly in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. So basically we have these parts, right? You can see that we have 3 different regions, right? West, East, and South Slavic. So these tribes originally were Slavic. The toponym, right? The name Slavic, there are a lot of different versions what exactly it can mean, or how, so what it can be derived from. Number 1 version is that it derives from the word Slova, which in a lot of Slavic languages means word. So originally, Slavic people were people who were denoted as people who speak the same language, right? So Slavic tribes could understand each other, right? And they had a bond between them and the way of communication. At the same time, another version says also that Slavic or Slav can be derived from Slava, that in a lot of Slavic languages means glory or glorious people, as Slavic languages speakers would consider themselves. There is one more version that Slav or Slavic, this toponym derives from worship, because we were worshipping our gods, our deities of Slavic mythology. At the same time, the most popular are these 2 theories, yeah, that the word Slavic derives from word, so we could comprehend each other, and glory. This is the other version. It's also very curious that Germanic tribes, right, so Germanic peoples, by Slavic ones, were called Niemcy, in a lot of different languages, right? And basically, here it's also very curious that, for example, Germanic tribes were called Niemcy because in Slavic languages it means mute, the mute ones, right? Because we could not comprehend each other, unfortunately. So probably this idea about word, right? So Slavic countries, Slavic speakers of Slavic languages comprehending each other, probably this can be one of the most appropriate versions. Also because we have another toponym that is used for Germanic peoples, that is Niemcy, so the mute ones who could not talk to us, right? So we wouldn't comprehend each other. If we look at the contemporary panoramic, right, so we still have the division between East Slavic, West Slavic countries and South Slavic. You can observe them on the map. It's also important to mention that Hungarian language is not a Slavic language. It has a different origin, right? So Hungary is one of the countries that is surrounded by Slavic culture representatives, but still has a little bit different culture from the Slavic one. The same situation happens also to Moldova and Romania, right? So they are having Slavic and Romanian, just Roman, right? Like Romance languages origin. So originally, Slavic countries are the countries that, so people of which spoke Slavic languages. And you can observe the map of Slavic languages situated here. Okay, let's continue. So what exactly is Slavic mythology, right? So Slavic mythology is going to be the collection of legends, different concepts, perceptions of life of Slavic people. Before we start determining Slavic mythology concept, I would like to analyze a little bit more the idea of myth, right? So what exactly we comprehend as myth, right? And what should we interpret as a myth or a part of someone's mythology? So number 1 point, myth are narrative patterns that give meaning to our existence. Basically, mythology, it attaches a certain meaning to our existence. Basically, we tried to explain our existence through mythology. Every culture has its own history described in mythology. Mythology also is the first point of conscience, right? So of national conscience. It is the first element ever to describe national conscience of one or another culture. The second point that we need to take in count is that humans have always been creators of myth, right? So it's something natural for human beings to create myth, stories, legends, because we would like to have the explanation to everything that happens in life, right? So it's also very important to understand that human beings, we have always been creating myth. And we also like creating of stories. We like to find some explanation to some natural elements of life. So it's a part of our human being. Then, very important point situated here is that both mythology and science expand the possibilities of mankind. Usually we think that mythology can be some kind of primitive idea or some kind of idea that is not necessary because it's too ancient and it is too old-fashioned. At the same time, we need to realize that mythology and science, they are not the contrary parts. They are the one part, the wholesome part of our humankind existence. So they are not the opposites. They are not the contradictory ones, right? They are connected, and thanks to progress, right, and science developments, we can achieve different results in most various areas. At the same time, mythology still helps us to explain a lot of ideas to ourselves, right? And some rituals are still a huge part of our life. The last point to consider, but not least, is that mythology represents a unique worldview of every culture. So thanks to mythology, we can comprehend a little bit more one or another culture, even the contemporary one, but we still can easily, easily comprehend it, right? We would comprehend it better if we knew what was the priority of these tribes or cultures or nations. Yeah, so it helps a lot to comprehend each other better in intercultural context too. All right. There are some challenges that appear in Slavic mythology studies, specifically in Slavic mythology studies. So Slavic mythology originally dates since its beginning, so since the discovery of first tribe settlements in the second millennium BC, right before Christ, till 1988. This is a year in which Rus of Kiev was baptized. Yeah, so on this year, basically, Ukrainian land also had Christianity officially coming and established on the lands. So that's how we can define the limits, time limits of Slavic mythology. Definitely there are some challenges in studying Slavic mythology because unfortunately, the majority of architectural, art objects, right? The majority of texts were destroyed because of Christianity coming, right? So usually all the idols, they would be destroyed, unfortunately. And the majority of the information that we knew about Slavic pagan religion, paradoxically, is from Christian chronicles, right? From Christian chroniclers who were describing pagan life, right? So all the previous life before Christianity. So the main challenge of Slavic mythology is that there is no text, for example, like we have in some other cultures, right? So there are some other cultures who have some books, textbooks of myth and all the tradition of myth, like Irish culture, or for example, Celtic mythology, or for example, even Greek ancient mythology. So we still have more information on that. And we have more information on the pantheon, yeah, of gods. At the same time, in Slavic mythology, the main struggle is that we only have Christian chroniclers, right? So we do not have original documents since the era, almost not. Only some archaeological sites, very few of them, right? And some texts, but written by Christian representatives, right? When Rus of Kiev already adapted Christian religion, right? The first Ukrainian state. All right, at the same time, investigation on Slavic mythology, even though it has a lot of challenges, it is still possible to analyze it, right? Let's do it. For example, we have these 4 points since which contemporary research is done. For example, what is possible to do is interpretation of chronicles and historical records. This interpretation proves the complexity of Slavic ancestors' worldview, right? So Christian chronicles are the only documents we have. At the same time, they are still helpful. In Christian chronicles, all the previous gods are mentioned, right? And all the rituals and traditions are also mentioned in the written documents. Something very important also is the point number 2, archaeological excavations on ancient territories demonstrate the diversity of its inhabitants' life. It's totally true. So archaeological excavations definitely can help us to comprehend a little bit more the diversity of ancient inhabitants, right, of ancient Slavic tribes. Basically, by analyzing how the household was built, what kind of activities they did, or for example, excavation of certain metals and their fusion also can help us a lot to comprehend better Slavic worldview. Okay, the next point that is originally analyzed is folklore and ethnographic data analysis, right? So definitely some elements of folklore, especially oral ones, like ritual songs, oral literature pieces, and sayings, they're extremely helpful, and they help us to expand our comprehension of Slavic culture, right? In Ukrainian culture, we still have a lot of different expressions dedicated to ancient pagan times. So these expressions, they influence our life even nowadays. Why don't we investigate them? Then we definitely have toponymy research, so toponyms, right? So they are names of places. Names of places are extremely important because basically toponymy research is made with the aim of tracing places of rituals by the names they used to have. For example, there are some names of villages or important archaeological sites in Ukraine that can trace us, that can lead us to ancient gods, for example, or to ancient traditions, or to some special name of rituals that it was named after. So it's extremely important to analyze toponymy names, right? To make a toponymy research. All right. Definitely, I wanted to show you also that there are some pieces of jewelry and pottery, right? There are some pieces that can also help us to comprehend Slavic pagan culture a little bit better. So here we have pieces of jewelry that originally were used by Christian representatives of Slavic countries. At the same time, it's curious that if we look at these earrings, we can observe some design, right? Some features of zoomorphic ideas, which means animals were represented, right? On the pieces of jewelry, like these earrings or like this wonderful bracelet. So it's also curious how in Ukrainian jewelry, at some point, masters tried to use different instruments, but also they tried to combine techniques. For example, it's possible to see a piece of jewelry with an image of a saint, Christian saint on it, and at the same time it would have some animals, for example, around, and the representation of animals and like nature world would be totally pagan idea. So that's why we also can see some fusion, right, of Christian and pagan culture, even in some pieces of jewelry. Then we have this jar from Romashki, Kiev region. This jar was dated from 11th century, so Christianity already arrived on the Slavic lands. At the same time, this jar is also extremely interesting because the pattern, the ornament it has, it reminds a lot the calendary. So basically here, there is a hypothesis, there is a theory that this jar can be it can represent some kind of harvest calendar for Slavic people. And pagan religion, honestly, is based on harvest calendar. So all the rituals, the majority of them at least, were done with the name of taking on count, right? Taking on count also pagan traditions and just following certain harvest calendar. Because the main idea also was to survive, to recollect more harvest, and here it is. All right, Slavic paganism features, right? So some of them that I would like to mention to you definitely are, here it is, right? Paganism, etymology of this word is that it is derived from pagus, Latin word, field or meadow. So pagan would be people who lived on fields, right, meadows, who were inhabitants of these areas. Why? Because Christianity originally came to the cities or towns. So that's why pagan means the one that belongs to field, right, or the field inhabitant. Some features that we have in Slavic mythology specifically, and this is something that is different from all the other mythologies like ancient Greece one, Nordic one, right? So some features are God pantheon system was not complete. We can reconstruct it a little bit, little by the texts. At the same time, it's not complete, which means, for example, in Slavic mythology, we have several gods who represent the sun, right? Or several gods who represent, for example, the household. So this is a little bit controversial, but that's how this deity pantheon would work in Slavic mythology. Slav mythology was constantly practiced. It wasn't only some collection of beliefs, but also it was a practice. So it was a lifestyle, right? It wasn't only some kind of belief. It was just a way of living and comprehending life. Deities had zoomorphic features, something that we cannot almost observe, so it's not so possible to observe it in ancient Greece. Mythology yet that in Slavic one there are some zoomorphic features, which means there are some creatures who had some elements of animals, right? So it's present in Slavic culture. Only few deities were serving to humans. It's also very curious that there were some deities that only in Slavic mythology they only had their own tasks to do, but not necessarily serve to human beings. Human would be a part of nature, but not the main element of it. Unity and harmony with nature are priorities, yeah? So as we mentioned, human being is not the center of Slavic mythology. It's a part of all the natural panorama, right? All the natural perspective. Sense of collectivity is stronger than individuality. We know that in the majority of religions, even nowadays, we have the concept of individuality. For example, that we need to worship, for example, certain gods, or we need to serve just to certain gods. We need religion to achieve paradise. For example, in the majority of religions, we have this concept. In Slavic mythology, we have the strong concept of collectivity. So one member is a part of the whole group, and nothing is done only to your individual purposes, but to maintain the sense of collectivity. All right. And there are also 3 levels that we need to mention. In Slavic pagan pantheon, we have superior level, main deities, anthropomorphic, which means human-like, in vast majority, right? Medium level, so some deities that weren't the main one, but still participated only in certain seasonal rituals, right? So, or some spirits of harvest, like some spirits of certain eras. Inferior levels that we have here, non-human creatures who lived in the forest, farm, or domestic areas. So on inferior level, we have some creatures, not even human beings or gods, creatures who could help, right, or who could do harm to Slavic representatives. Let's analyze some of the superior level. Let's start with the first one, Perun, deity of thunder and lightning. First, it's mentioned in Tale of Bygone Years in 1945, Повесть временных лет. Yeah, so this is going to be the name in Ukrainian for this work, for us to recognize it. So here it is, right? Vladimir, Prince Vladimir, the one who brought Christianity on Ukrainian lands, then began to reign alone in Kiev, and he set up idols on the hills outside the castle with the hall. One of Perun, made of wood, with a head of silver and a mustache of gold, and other horse, Dashbog, Stribog, Simargl, and Mokosh. So we have also names of some other deities, yeah. Perun he can be compared to Zeus, right? In Greece ancient mythology, it's the main god, usually it's represented as the main one. His special feature is that he can behave differently towards human beings. He can help them, right? At the same time, he could also strike a human being by lightning, right? According to the main idea of belief. So this creature, this deity, was not a good, not bad one, but at the same time, so it could do harm, or it could done some good also to Slavic representatives. This is the main figure of Slavic mythology, and it's his name, right? It's repeated several times in wonderful different texts. Then the opposite for Perun can be Veles, deity of cattle and afterlife. Yeah, so in case of Veles, we have this idea, right, of deities that is responsible for cattle. This deity was serving human beings, right? And also he is responsible for afterlife, right? And for our well-being. Sometimes Veles would be like the opposite to Perun, so the main god, and then the one that is used for afterlife. So you can see there is also this tradition of these connections that exist between cattle and afterlife ideas somehow. Harvest, right? It also has its own eras. So harvest, cattle, and probably even life and death for Slavic mythology were connected. The next one is Dashbog. It's a deity of sunlight, summer, and joy, right? So for this deity, we have several deities in Slavic mythologies that belonged to the sky in general, yeah? So we will also see one more of them. Dashbog is deity of sunlight, summer, and joy. So you can see that sunlight in many cultures represents joy and the most abundant period of human's life. So usually harvest would be recollected in summer, right, or just spring, summer, some eras, autumn. So these eras have most sun as possible. This deity represents the sun. Then finally we have a female figure here, right? Female representative of Slavic mythology. Mokosh, also famous for the names as Mokosha or Moksha, deity of weaving, right? So she was weaving the fate. You can see her, she has her weaving instrument, right? And the horn also. So she was considered the one responsible for human's fate. And she was weaving it, right? At the same moment. Definitely she, as a female figure, she also represents fertility. Sometimes she could represent also harvest. So this figure is one of the most important ones also for Slavic mythology. All right. Stribog, deity of wind, air, and weather. So here we have a god, right, that represents this different wind and like the force, right, the natural element of air, right, and it is present here. Usually he would be responsible for great weather, and Stribog also could help Slavic people to ask for the wind, right, for example, or to ask for the clouds to come and the rain would start. So his function is also extremely important one. Then, from the second part of the pantheon, like the middle part, medium part, we have some creatures like Rusalka, Mavka, Liubov, right? So Rusalka is one of the versions of a siren. Yeah, at the same time, it's present in different mythologies of several countries. For example, in Ukraine, in Russia, Poland, like Slovakia, for example, right? So different countries had this image of Rusalka, which is a siren. It's also curious that depending on the region, Rusalka can be different. In northern countries, or more like closer to north part, for example, for Russia, for Baltic Sea representatives, this creature would have different, even like description of appearance and different features of character in comparison to the South members, right? Like South Slavic countries, or even Ukraine that is situated more on south than Baltic countries and Russia. Mavka is another creature, so it is sometimes compared to Rusalka, but it's a little bit different. Also, you can see that it's more like forest creature, not necessarily the water one. And Liubov, so the one that helps the Slavic people just to be in the forest. The forest was a sacred place for the Slavic people, and it was also a mysterious one because of the danger it could brought. I would like to emphasize a little bit something on the climate. Ukraine has 3 types of climate. I think it can be obvious for Ukrainians, probably, but for other members, from other countries, we have 3 types of climate. Mixed forest that has humid and like a little bit more cold weather. Forest steppe, this spot, this can be described as some elements of forest and field. And steppe, that is, this part has more, it's pretty dry climate, right? And it doesn't have so much wood like the forest. So you can see even in Ukraine, we have different parts of different regions, climatic ones, geographical ones, and definitely the mythology process of inhabitants of these regions also could be different. So climate, weather definitely influences a lot also on the concept of mythology. It's also extremely important. Some holidays that we still have, spring and autumn equinox, right? So usually these days would be honored with some rituals, probably with some ritual songs. Yeah, so these days definitely were important. So spring and autumn equinox. Then we have Maslina, beginning of spring holiday. This is a holiday that we still have in Slavic countries. For this holiday, we prepare a huge quantity of pancakes because pancake usually is a symbol of the sun. So because it's round and golden, right? So basically that's why we also still have this holiday. Nowadays, it's more like a family holiday. So we have no rituals situating around us right now, but we use it as a family holiday and to celebrate the beginning of spring. Winter and especially summer solstice, right? Ivana Kupala. So this would be the day for magic, right? So summer period, usually a lot of rituals would be done, especially like rituals dedicated maybe to love and relationship, right? So some young men and women, so they would come to the river and to just tried to watch in the river, for example, the image of the beloved one, right? Especially ladies, yeah. So they tried to find the beloved one just in this magical night of summer solstice, right? Very good. Slavic myth presence in mass culture. One of the examples can be the Witcher TV series. It is, as far as I remember, Polish-American TV series. So definitely we can observe some Slavic mythology elements there. Another cartoon that is going to appear, I hope, very soon. I have such a huge desire to watch it. So Mavka the Forest Song. It is inspired on one of the works of Lesia Ukrainka, so a huge poem for Ukrainian literature, very important one. And we are waiting for cartoon to just appear soon on our screens. By the moment, it is still in process. And we also have the rise of Ukrainian vyshivanka in fashion. Vyshivanka is embroidered clothes, right? A lot of cultures have the presence of embroidered clothes. And for Ukrainians, our tradition of embroidered clothes is also very important because there were several patterns. For example, each vyshyvanka would be made individually for every person, and it would have certain codes. So the way you embroider it, it also can determine how your destiny is going to be, right? Or what exactly you would achieve in life. So usually a vyshyvanka would be a very intimate and very detailed kind of gift. And nowadays it's also very beautiful, right, and popular. Board games that we also have, Forest of Red Ghost, for example, Baba Yaga, another mythical creature. Nowadays we have a lot of different board games inspired in Slavic myth. Even though we know so little about Slavic myth, it's curious how we have even pop culture nowadays inspired on them, right, and on Slavic countries. For example, here we have also Size. I totally recommend you this game and just different examples of board games, even more than these ones. All right, in conclusion, I would like to show you this image of the Garden of Eden. This was the paradise, right? This was the image of paradise for Slavic people. And what I would like to say is that Slavic paganism is considered a pretty outdated idea nowadays. It is true, but it's the idea that represents our origin. Slavic people usually had the sense of being part of collectivity, right? So they wanted to be part of a group, part of a tribe. Originally, we had some deities, as you can see, that not necessarily serve to human beings, but are part of human nature. And this idea of the person being part of nature and not only the center of it is extremely curious. And it's also curious to see how a lot of Slavic countries, so we still have the presence of it, yeah, the respect to nature, the unity with nature that we have, and the respect to all beings, right? Probably this is a part of our origin. So all the features that we saw, we can say, right, according to all these features, that it's complicated to investigate Slavic mythology because of the lack of documents. At the same time, there are a lot of elements of documents, but like archaeological ones, right? Jewelry, so archaeological sites, archaeological pieces, some elements of pottery. So we still have some ideas to investigate, and even because of the lack of the documents, it doesn't mean that we need to stop investigating on Slavic mythology, and we still need to continue our best to try to comprehend worldview of Slavic and a lot of other different countries. So here it is. Thank you so much for your attention. Here is situated my email in case if you have any doubts or any kind of comment for me. So I'm also waiting for some questions that you can have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liubov. This was a very interesting and fantastic lecture. We already have 2 questions, so let's start with these 2 questions. You can also see them in the chat, but I'll just read them out loud. So the first question was about etymology, one of the first slides you showed. What about a different etymology from the word slave, meaning that many Slavs were kidnapped back in the day and sold into slavery?
Thank you so much. This is an extremely important question because indeed the word slave in English, it is derived from Latin, and definitely so it happened to be this tradition. Yeah, so originally Slavic people were kidnapped and used for slavery, especially for some Nordic countries, as far as I remember. So definitely it is. You can see that Slavic countries, originally we also have this process of migration present. So there were a lot of tribes that had migration as a part of their life. And definitely history of Slavic countries also proves to us that we constantly need to just protect or fight against each other. So unfortunately, that's how it is. And continuing with the etymology of the word, so yeah, indeed, the word slave, if we investigate it, it derives from Slavic, right? Because usually these ideas, right, were synonymic ones.
The next question is about Nordic influences. Is there any evidence of Norse influence within Slavic paganism, such as the presence of deities like Odin or Thor?
Very good. Yeah, it's true. So we have Nordic influence, right? Indeed, we have it. And also there are some evidences, similarities of influence between all the Indo-European families, right? So Indo-European languages, right? So they would be usually connected. And there are even some features that are common with Iranian cultures. So Ukraine has Slavic mythology in general, right? It has connection with a majority of different cultures. It's true, because we can see some parallels. Recently, I had a conference also in which I was comparing Slavic mythology with Aztec one. And indeed, there are even some similarities in Aztec mythology. So even though the era is different, but we have the same deities, we have the same gods who are, so their functions coincide one with another. So it's possible to find some bond even with Slavic and all the different cultures. With Nordic one, indeed, because of the history that we had.
Thank you. So the next question is, would you say that there has been a revival of Slavic mythology as in the popular culture you mentioned? If so, when did this revival happen and why? Or has it always been present in popular culture?
Very good question. I believe that mythology is present every time, so every day in our daily life, it is still present in literature, in our daily activities, in some expressions, in the way we talk, in our tradition, in our national clothes. So I would say that mythology in general has no point, for example, of not being mentioned. It is present still, right? Every day we can observe its importance, and especially pagan culture, right? Or, for example, indigenous cultures, right? That originally were impacted by Christianity or by conquerors from other land. So they still are present. They still have its impact, right? Nowadays, it's also extremely popular to analyze mythology, right? I think because of the history context that it has, because there is something like romantic also in analyzing mythology and all the old traditions. But honestly, I believe that every moment has been a revival of Slavic mythology. So we still have it, right? And not only Slavic, but mythology in general.
Thank you. We have many questions. It's a good questions, and it's a good sign. So the next question is from our participant from Poland, who would be interested to learn a bit more about how the Slavic mythology is preserved in Ukrainian mentality. So this person is originally from Poland, and the Slavic mythology could be seen in how Polish people react to the war. There is this sense that we are the same people, and whether, basically, if you could perhaps comment on how perhaps, this understanding of sameness, can refer far back really to the pagan time.
All right, so I believe that this concept of the same people, for example, right, Slavic people being the same people, I do believe that somehow, so we have a connection, definitely. All Slavic countries have a connection between each other, even non-Slavic ones. We already mentioned that Hungary, for example, is not a Slavic country, but according to the fact that it is surrounded by Slavic countries, so definitely it would have the influence of them, right? I believe that there is also a stereotype that all the Slavic countries, inhabitants, we comprehend each other. For example, if I'm from Ukraine, I can speak also freely Czech language, or, for example, just Polish language. So if I do not study it, I cannot. There are some similarities, definitely, but it's also curious how Slavic culture is connected, but we should remember that East Slavs are different one from West ones, right? And they are different also from South. So we also had vast territory also mentioned here. If we look geographically, I do believe that, so Ukraine and Poland, for example, we share some similarities, but at the same time, we are different. So we need to recognize that our countries also had different paths, but at the same time, Poland has always been present in history of Ukraine and has been supporting us, right? So it also depends. I think geographically, if you look also at the divisions that there are between several countries, so there is more probability, so more far away they are, so probably more differences they are. Or in case of, for example, maybe the question is towards like Russia and Ukraine, right? So in case of Russia, I do believe that Russia is a mixture also of different cultures and regions, right? So I think there are also more mental codes that could influence differently on Russia and on Ukraine. So even though we share the same boundaries with different countries, we are different. So we also need to recognize that we are different. We can be different because of our history, because of anything that can happen in the past or nowadays.
Sorry, I just received a message that my internet connection is not stable. So if something happens, So I just, the next question is, are there still some tribes present who believe in these deities? Or actually, I could perhaps add to this, if there are any examples of, religious practices who are not Christian, but, more inspired on pagan culture.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's also a very nice question. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Because look, there are people, as far as I remember, I'm not sure, but I need to investigate more on it, pan-Slavic communities. So there are communities who still have followed, right, so pagan beliefs, and who still had this impact of pagan life in their life, right? So there are some closed communities of people who practice it. It's totally true in multiple Slavic countries. The difference, for example, that we have, okay, in case of Mexico, so the place I work at, so in Mexico there are some, for example, representatives of indigenous cultures, and sometimes they can be more open or closed community. At the same time, something that happens with the Slavic culture is that Slavic people, so we had evolutionary process and we achieved to nowadays, and we are divided in several countries, right? So originally, Slavic culture had the period of paganism until 1988 with the baptism of Rus of Kiev by Vladimir. So we had a period of Christianity, right? That was introduced by our prince to the land, right? To the Rus of Kiev. So that's why maybe it's a little bit different, because I believe that there are some tribes all over the world who still could maintain their features, like original beliefs and features, right? In case of Slavic countries, we all have moved on since Christianity also, right? And we all had developed maybe a little bit different even mentality nowadays, because you can see how different countries are formed. Yeah, we definitely are not the same as pagan tribes, the ones that I showed you before. So you can see that in Ukraine, for example, Ukraine was formed through different tribes. The same situation has happened to Poland, to all the other countries. So maybe that's why we have no tribe settlings. So we have no tribe location nowadays. But there are people who believe and even practice nowadays, as far as I remember, pagan beliefs.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments to Liubov? Well, I think we had an intense round of questions and discussion. I would like to thank you, Liubov, for joining us today and for providing this beautiful overview to Slavic and Ukrainian mythology. And I would like to remind everyone that next week we will have the last lecture in our series, and it will take place again on Wednesday, June the 1st, and it will be called Society in Turbulent Times, Ukraine after 2014 by Anna Chebotaryova from the University of Oslo. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you, Liubov, once again for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so